Good morning. Today, I'm going to share with you a real life story about choosing a life of serving others. I graduated from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor many, many moons ago. Shortly thereafter, I headed off for several months of volunteer work in southwestern Canada, and immediately following that, a much anticipated trip around the world with my older sister. It was a truly over-the-top way to take a break after 4 years of university study. I returned home in time for a friend's wedding and found a letter waiting for me from the regional director of the youth organization I had been volunteering with throughout college. Do you have a job? Have you figured out what you want to do yet? Do you know where you want to live? The director inquired. I was suddenly facing so many questions. Reality was hitting me hard. I had no job and wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to focus my efforts. I'd been toying with following in my father's footsteps and pursuing an entry-level position with a management consulting firm. Another plan involved focusing upon my work with adolescents and seeing where that might lead. My older sister and I were now back in Connecticut, living with our parents, making plans for the next road upon which we would travel. She quickly began applying for training programs in banking. I fell into a local hourly job at a sail loft, helping people find the gear that they needed for their boats and taking special orders. I needed something to get me out of the house every day and to give me a chance to think about my next steps. I started making lists of pros and cons of various career paths and researching different job opportunities. What exactly could I do with a bachelor's degree in French and political science? The letter I found upon my return was a gentle prod. I'd been invited to visit Colorado and see if I might like working there. I was being asked to help start a youth program in a local Catholic church that was asking for help with its high schoolers. Apparently, my name kept coming up. The trip would be a no-obligation opportunity to meet the team, explore the town a bit, and to see if there might be a fit. It sounded terrific, but there was a catch. Going to Colorado would indeed be lovely, but should I accept the job, it meant that I would be responsible for raising my own salary. I knew what was involved in raising my own support and was somewhat terrified of broaching the subject with my parents, who had just put me through college. I was lucky. I didn't have student debt, but that didn't mean I should now ask my friends and family to support this call to work with other people's children. In my family, you went to college and left home to make your way in the world. I mentioned the trip west and the idea of continuing my college volunteering role in a more professional capacity to my mother, who, a devout Catholic, was quite supportive. My father was a man of faith who found Jesus on the water. He, on the other hand, was a completely different story. You're joking, aren't you? You don't really mean that after you've just completed your degree, with honors no less, you're going to ask people to send you money so you can do missionary work with teenagers. What am I missing? My father asked. This is crazy. Well, honey, he said, you go and pursue what you want, but don't send a single letter to any of my friends. My father's response gave me a lot of pause. I could see his point, but I felt the call all the same. I had thought about working with kids in this organization while I was in college and knew that I would regret ignoring this opportunity. I spent a lot of time reflecting upon the decision, praying for direction, and realized that in spite of my dad's discomfort and lack of support, I needed to move forward with the plan. I sat down to write, and out came the letter that I would send en masse to as many of my friends and family for whom I could find an address. I made a few edits and passed it to my mom, who then made her own comments. And then my dad asked to read it. I was a little hesitant, but I handed it over. He read it, and then he looked at me. He approached me and held my hands in his and said, "Let's say a prayer that the Lord touches the hearts of all those who get this letter and read it." I was stunned. Was this the same man who 2 days earlier warned me to stay away from all of his contacts? People's response to my letter would be critical to my ability to buy food and pay for my expenses. Calling on friends and family to give financially to support the ministry to which I had been called was a tough ask. I was heading to Colorado to serve God and a lot of teenagers. Who would think that this was a good idea? In today's gospel reading, the disciples are also confused about the meaning of service. Once again, the 12 demonstrated their lack of understanding about Jesus' glory. Jesus and the disciples are back on the road to Jerusalem. In this gospel passage in Mark, Jesus has just finished explaining to the 12 for the third time what would happen to him. And also, for the third time, the disciples missed the message about the impending death and rising of Jesus. As they continue down the road, James and John focus upon Jesus and speak to him outright, stating boldly, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." We're not privy to Jesus's body language or to his facial response, but according to what we can learn from the reading, Jesus, no doubt quite curious about the intentions of James and John, asks them, "Well, what is it you want me to do for you?" The disciples, having clearly obtained Jesus's attention, seize their opportunity to make their desire for a little power and a little recognition known. They look at Jesus, and without skipping a beat, they ask Jesus to reserve the seats on his right and his left for each of the brothers when Jesus comes in glory. The irony here is that there's no evidence in the scriptures that any of the disciples have internalized or understood what Jesus has been trying to explain. Jesus' glory is his death and subsequent resurrection. The kingdom that Jesus is inaugurating is not about earthly glory, filled with prestige and power and position. It's about humility and service. Jesus responds to the two brothers, asking if they will be able to drink the cup from which he drinks and be baptized with the baptism that Jesus himself will be baptized with. James and John readily agree that they can manage this. And Jesus then finds himself, it would appear, in a bit of a quandary. Jesus concedes that the disciples can drink from the same cup he will drink and be baptized as he is baptized. But he quickly redirects James and John when he explains to them it isn't for him to decide who will be on his left and on his right. He implies that it's God who decides this. The disciples devolve into arguments and bickering, frustrated that James and John sought to take care of themselves ahead of the other disciples. James and John were united not just by the blood of brothers, but by their mutual interest in using their relationship with Jesus to ensure that they were well taken care of in Jesus' new kingdom. The disciples continue to miss the point that Christ is trying to make. Jesus works overtime trying to explain. He provides examples, metaphors, and illustrations that they just don't seem to grasp. The disciples cannot envision a reality beyond their current Roman-controlled world. Christ says to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them." Jesus is urging the disciples to think differently. He's trying to help them envision a different kind of power structure, one based on humility and service to others. Jesus continues, "But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." When Jesus gives his life as a ransom, he frees us not to become great as the world understands greatness, but to live a life of service to others. Amen.